This is Bethan Soar on the 20th of February 2020, recording for Lights at Derby Theatre. Please can you introduce yourself and tell me when and where you were born?
My name is Ava Hunt and I was born in Hounslow in Middlesex in London.
It's lovely. And can you tell me a bit more about what you do?
Well, I do lots of different things, as many artists do. So sometimes I'm acting, and that might be in film, on television or in theatre. Sometimes I'm directing, and that again might be in theatre, at small scale community theatre or theatre for young audiences. Sometimes I'm producing, which means I'm raising money and putting teams together to do projects. And then sometimes I'm also lecturing and working with students, both on undergraduate and the postgraduate courses. And I'm also doing a PhD at the moment.
That's quite a lot, yeah. What is your connection to the East Midlands?
I came to the East Midlands in 1991, I think. Or was it 1990? I can't remember. And I was working with Nottingham Playhouse, and I was doing a piece of theatre for young audiences. And it was about HIV and AIDS. And in actual fact, the local authority banned the production because at the time it was illegal to take a piece of theatre that presented gay relationships as being normal into a school. And so the local authority banned the project, and we actually toured it into youth clubs. And it was when I first started working with Liam Steele, who's now very popular and well-regarded choreographer. And so it was a very interesting piece of work. So that was a long time ago now, yes.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Who do you live with when you were growing up? Sorry.
When I was growing up, I lived with my mum and my dad and my younger sister, Tracy.
Yeah, what did your parents do for work?
My mum was, she was a mum actually. Sometimes she would have some part-time work. She did some typing. And my dad, he originally started off at the ticket office on the Underground. That was during the war. And then obviously when I was younger, that was after the war, and he was then working for British Gas in the administration, one of the administration departments, yeah.
Can you tell me a bit more about your first memory of theatre as a child?
My first memory of theatre was at the Richmond Theatre in London, and I saw a pantomime, and I just thought it was the most magical thing. And they threw sweets out to everyone in the audience, and I didn't get one, and I was so disappointed. But I also had done a performance myself, because I was part of a dance. I did some dance with my friend, and so I had actually been on a stage, and we used to do these little dance shows. And there is a very embarrassing story I could tell you. Shall I tell you that?
Yeah.
Okay, so at the end of one of the performances, each of the performers had to go up and receive a present from the person who was organising it. And I was standing right on the end of the line, and I wanted to go to the toilet. And because I was quite young, I suppose I was about 5 or 6, I was holding myself. And there was a very nice woman behind the curtain in the wings who said, "Do you want to go to the toilet?" And I just looked at her. So she took me off the stage, and I just sort of sidled off. And I was sat on the toilet, and then they called my name out for my present. And the woman behind the curtain said, "She's on the toilet." And everybody heard. So I was just mortified, because then I had to wait to the end to have my present. And it was just, yeah. But I couldn't concentrate, really. I wasn't disciplined enough. It didn't mean anything to me. But when I was at the theatre, I don't know, suddenly this light went on inside of me.
Yeah.
And even though we didn't have a theatre near where I lived and no one was connected to the theatre, you couldn't do a GCSE in theatre at the time.
Well, what would you say was your main trigger for getting into theatre and acting?
My teacher at secondary school, Mr. Springle.
Can you tell me more about it?
Well, I owe everything to him, really. because, as I say, you couldn't do GCSE at school. And he was an English teacher, and he had a production that he'd written himself, and so he cast me in the lead role. I wasn't part of the gang. There was like a kind of a gang of girls that were like really, attractive and intelligent and really good at sport, and I was none of those things. And then when he cast me in the lead role, I was just, I don't know, it just didn't make any sense to me. But it felt so right. It just felt so right to be, I don't know, playing out that character, and yeah.
Yeah, would you say that your teacher was your biggest inspiration then?
He certainly enabled me to find something that I was good at. I wasn't any good at school. So I left school with 2 O-levels or GCSEs at the age of 16, and at the end of the school year, when I did that lead part in that production with Mr. Springle, the school gave me an award, and that was the only thing I ever won at school, and I kind of kept that, in my heart really, but I didn't know that I could be an actor. I didn't know I could be in the theatre, because it just wasn't possible. There wasn't any role models, do you know what I mean? I might just as well have said I wanted to be an astronaut.
Would you say that was the start of your journey into acting, or was there more to it?
Well, what happened then was that I got a job working in Boots the Chemist at the age of 16, and I just sort of decided just to do bits of work, and I started doing typing like my mum had done. And then at the age of 18, I we decided to chuck everything in and just go and do some travelling. So we did. And when we came back, I suppose I was 19 then. And I don't know, I realised I just didn't want to waste my life doing something that didn't make me feel good. And I started doing some research, basically looking in the yellow pages, because that's how you did research. And I joined a amateur dramatics group, and then I got a job at the BBC as a production secretary in Radio 4, and I still carried on doing amateur dramatics because I thought maybe if I did amateur dramatics and I worked at the BBC in radio and in drama, that would be enough. But every time I was in the studio looking through the glass to the actors who were performing, I don't know, I just realised it wasn't enough. And I realised that because my mum died when I was 10, I'd always been acutely aware of how precious life was. And, we're here one day and we're gone the next. And I just knew I couldn't waste my life doing something that, again, I'd always regret that I hadn't given it a go. So I saved up my money. I worked like crazy. I paid for myself to go through drama school. And, yeah.
Here we are.
Here we are.
So you mentioned that you went travelling. Would you say the time you spent travelling was really effective for you to get in the right mindset for when you came back and went into acting? Would you recommend that break from life?
Yeah, I think it helped me to sit back, because again, we had no money. We would just literally, some days, if we were in really kind of expensive countries, we wouldn't eat anything. We were sleeping on trains. I mean, it's not the kind of travelling where you have a ticket and you're just jumping on planes, and in hotels and things like that. So I guess the thing was that, again, I just really got this sense of how precious life was, and that at the age of 19, I just didn't want to do something that, didn't excite me, that I didn't feel passionate about. And as I say, I did try to combine it, because I still didn't really understand that you could work in the theatre. I didn't really understand that you could be paid and that could be your job. So I thought, again, like as I say, that if I did it as an amateur and then I had a proper job during the day, that would be enough.
No, that's really inspiring. Could you tell me a bit more about your acting career, especially on the TV soap kind of side of it?
Yes, I've been in Hollyoaks. I was a detective inspector. I've done a lot of Emmerdale. I played a lot of doctors and solicitors and things like that. I was in Coronation Street and been in... there was a guy called Nick Berry who used to be in EastEnders, and he was in a series called Heartbeat, and that was set in Yorkshire, so I did an episode of that. A Touch of Frost with David Jason, and what else? A Channel 4 drama about motor neuron disease. I suppose that's the one that I'm the most proud about, because I had to meet two women who were at different stages of motor neuron disease. And also the audition process was incredibly demanding. The director wanted to see if emotionally I could really connect with the character. I remember this one scene where basically I say I don't want to live anymore, because with motor neuron disease it's a very kind of debilitating condition, and I have a scene where I say to my son, I want to die basically, and you've got to get on with your life. And I just connected with it in a very, very deep way. The camera person had done a documentary about motor neuron disease, and after this scene that we did, he was crying. And I think, sometimes when you're making documentaries, you can be quite, because you're looking through a camera, you're quite distanced from things. So I think that whole thing of everybody in the room just we got to the end of the shot and it was like...
Yeah. Can you tell me a bit more about your big first break?
Well, I'm not sure I know how to answer that question really, because I just sort of feel that it's been just very long and incremental, and a career as an actor and director and working in theatre and film, it's not like you do one thing and then you do another thing. I mean, okay, when I look back, I can see that obviously, I have, acquired a lot of skills, and I've met a lot of people, and I think I've always kind of just wanted to do it. It was a big thing getting into drama school. That was a big thing. And then getting my equity card also felt like a really big thing. When I left drama school and I got my equity card, then getting an agent, that felt like a really big thing. But what was going on alongside that was this, in addition to that, was this understanding that I wanted to make a difference, and particularly with young people, and particularly kind of the political context of the work. That started to grow, and I think in the 80s, in the mid to late 80s, I was involved in, going to equity conferences. I even beat Vanessa Redgrave to speak an address conference about this particular motion that was being proposed. And so I became, in the 80s, incredibly politicised, and it was a very political time. Margaret Thatcher was in power, and, like I said earlier on, we had Clause 28, there was the miners' strike, it was apartheid in South Africa, and everything that we did in our work felt so important. And I was part of a theatre company. I suppose one of the things that I am really proud of, and that did make a difference, to answer your question, is that I became part of this theatre company called Ava Hunt that had been set up by Tony Robinson, who plays Baldrick, that's what I'm trying to say, in Blackadder, and Phil Redman, who set up Hollyoaks. And I was working in this theatre company, and it was a permanent job. I had a permanent actor's job. That meant 52 weeks of the year I was employed as an actor, and we toured all over the country. And we were touring 3 shows, and we had we made the decisions about who we commissioned as a writer. We employed the directors, we employed the actors, we did everything, and we made all of the decisions. And that, because the work was so political and I learnt so much, I think in a way that was like going to a university. In a way, that was my education. That was when I started to realise that everything around us is political. And as a young woman coming from a non-theatrical background, you know, it woke my eyes up. It woke me up to the understanding of, what kind of work I wanted to make.
Yeah, I completely agree with your view on politics and theatre. But what I'd really like to know is, do you agree with the phrase, it's not what you know, it's who you know, especially in your TV work?
In TV work, I think it's your agent, and I think the connections that your agent has with casting directors, and it's the relationships that the casting directors have with the directors. I have worked consistently for a casting director in Emmerdale, and that does make a difference. Getting those agents who have those right connections with casting directors, who have great relationships with directors, who are working on great productions, can make a difference. But, you know, I'm not Judi Dench's daughter. So I don't have those, I never have had those advantages. I've never had those kinds of support structures that would just step in. I think the networks that I have now, yes, they help to make the work that I want to make, but certainly not in television.
Yeah. Can you describe to me a bit more in detail about what it's like being on set in the main soap?
It's very. I think this is one of the reasons why so often you see the same faces over and over, because it is incredibly stressful. First of all, it's multi-camera, so you've got 2 or 3 cameras who are set up at the same time. So if you're working in film, you do everything on a single camera, and so you'll have a 2-shot where you have 2 people talking to each other, and then you do the close-up of one person, and then you move the camera and all the lighting and all the sound, and then you do the other shot. And in Emmerdale and all of the soaps, they have multiple cameras. So in this shot, for instance, there'll be 2 of us talking, and then I've got the close-ups and the reverses that are being filmed simultaneously, and they are working so fast. You have to hit the spot, you have to know your lines, you have to give a performance, you've got to do all of these technical things. So it's an incredible. They call it the mechanical media for a good reason, because it is so technical. And they haven't got time. You know, if you are stressed out, you can't do it, they haven't got time for it, because the knock-on effect of having all of those people on set and everybody running over time. I remember once I was doing a series, I was in a series, and it was right up against the end of the shoot of the day, and I had to eat and talk at the same time, which is incredibly difficult, because you have to remember exactly when you're putting the croissant to your mouth on what line, and still act and make it look normal. And I don't know, I got one of them muddled up, and the director just screamed, and she just went, "Keep the cameras rolling! Go again, action," like this. And I just, it was, terrifying.
I can imagine. Would you say that working on TV lived up to your expectations?
Oh dear, I don't know what my expectations were, really. I think watching yourself on television when it's being broadcast is incredibly painful. So sometimes I've just got the cushioning front pillow in front of me or something. As I say, the one piece that I was really proud of was the motor neuron disease piece, because I think that the difficulty with working in a lot of soaps is that you are essentially playing characters that are supporting the main characters and their narratives. So you're parachuting in, basically. So you're kind of as I say, serving the main characters' stories. And so therefore sometimes it can feel very unsatisfying, which is why actually I really like working with young student filmmakers who are much more interested in making something experimental, something slightly different, and where you've got the opportunity to make much more of a contribution to the film.
Yeah. When did you think that theatre officially became your career?
I suppose in my 30s. I really wanted to direct, and it took me quite a while to find the people that I wanted to work with and to raise the funding that I wanted to do. And the first show that I did was working with a group of young people directing a youth theatre show for a company called Shared Experience, which was set up by Mike Alfreds many years ago. And I was already working on the project, and then they said, okay, we're going to do this. Anyway, that's another long story. But I think when I became a director and a producer, that's when I realised that actually I gave up all those other jobs. I gave a lot of people when they're starting out, when they leave drama school, work in a bar or work in a restaurant, and I'd always gone back to typing, and it was in my early 30s that I stopped working in for agencies in as a temp, and I've never gone back. So I guess that was what happened, yes, in my early 30s.
Yeah, especially since you've been interested in theatre from a young child. Obviously you've had connections to the industry for quite a while. So what would you say has been your biggest setback in your career?
Well, I think life, relationships, that can get in the way. How we feel about ourselves, our mental health can drastically impact on our self-esteem. And what we believe, believing in yourself is really difficult. And self-doubt is something that, I talk to my son now about it, and I say, look, self-doubt is really important. It means that, we're thinking about things and we're questioning ourselves, and, that's important. But sometimes I think that if those questions become too loud and too big, it can immobilise us, and we think, I'm not any good, I don't know why I'm doing this, I'm wasting my time, I should just give up. And I think, so I think dealing with those concerns, those doubts, because inside I know where I came from. I'm just that little girl from Hounslow.
Yeah, so if you've had a bad day or you're kind of struggling with the self-doubt and stuff, how do you cope with that? How do you bounce back and go back into the industry with it?
I talk to my friends who I trust and love. And by talking to other people, I understand that they also have the same doubts and fears, and that actually it's completely normal.
Yeah. Can you tell me more about your time with the Yorkshire Women Theatre?
So Yorkshire Women's Theatre Company was set up by Kay Mellor, who's done a lot of kind of sort of TV and film and whatnot. And it was a women's theatre collective, and we made work around issues that impacted on women's lives. So that might be eating disorders, it might be domestic violence, alcohol misuse, heart attack, lots and lots of different shows. But originally it was set up so that it would tour to community women's and women's groups, and it came and so around International Women's Day we were always incredibly busy. And we were touring around community centres and women's groups. And then when I joined the company, we extended that so that the company started to work with young people and we started to work in schools and in youth clubs. And it was a wonderful opportunity again to find my director's feet and to start to really develop my understanding of producing and raising funding for projects that I wanted to work on.
That's really interesting. So, talking from the director, producer perspective, what kind of theatre do you like to make?
I want to make theatre that make people think, that question the world in which we live in, that hopefully is a provocation so that when people leave the theatre, they're continuing to think about those questions. And there might be an image or a moment or a dilemma that a character has, and for the audience to take that out and to continue to question the performance and the world in which we live in. That's what I want. And then also maybe from that questioning and thinking in a different way to do something differently. And I think that so much of the theatre that we create is for a particular kind of audience that essentially maintains the status quo. And for people that for many thousands of years have been making theatre that keep the status quo, that keep us in our place. And I'm passionate about social change, and I'm passionate about actually creating theatre that resonates with all people, not a particular kind of audience that are maintaining that status quo.
You said that you're really passionate about social change and aspects like that, but obviously you've got practitioners like Brecht who are in the industry and stuff. Do you kind of follow their kind of style? Like, do you have a certain style yourself? Like, how do you go about having that reflection from the audience?
Well, I suppose a lot of my work has been influenced by practitioners like Augusto Boal. So Brecht would watch a piece of theatre, Brecht would make a piece of theatre where he wanted the audience to leave their brains, their hats and coats on the door, but bring their brains into the theatre and to be woken up. Whereas Augusto Boal wanted people to wake up, but he also wanted them to rehearse for life. He wanted them to rehearse the differences that they were going to make. So quite a lot of the theatre that I've made has got a participatory element to it, which is about empowering people to make that rehearsal.
Yeah, no, I agree with that as well. Can you tell me a bit more about your current production company?
Yes, so last year I was making a piece of theatre called Journeys of Destiny, which was about a young Syrian refugee called Saad al-Qassab who escaped Syria, and he now lives in Melbourne in Australia. So I've become very interested in telling real stories and about making those real stories accessible and interesting and empowering for young people. And now this year I'm making a piece of theatre with young unaccompanied asylum seekers who live in Derbyshire, and finding ways where we can tell their stories that empower them, but also encourage audiences to think differently about a dominant rhetoric that we have at the moment, which is about pulling up the drawbridges and preventing people from seeking sanctuary in this country.
That sounds really inspiring. Can you also tell me a bit more about your work with Theatre Centre?
Yes, so Theatre Centre was a company that was set up by Brian Way, and when David Johnston took over in the late 70s, he was really kind of instrumental in making theatre that told different stories, that told stories about women who, strong women who had been written out of history, that put black and Asian stories centre stage, and also told stories from a different perspective in terms of sexual orientation. And so he was really kind of sort of key in questioning about how we make theatre. So making sure that we work with writers and directors that represented that diversity. And so I worked with that company in 1985 with writers like Bryony Lavery and Nona Shepherd and Noel Gregg, Philip Osmond, real kind of sort of highly skilled writers. And the first time, in fact, I actually came to Derbyshire was with Theatre Centre in 1985, and it was a piece about young women.
That's really lovely. So obviously your role is extremely diverse in theatre, but what do you enjoy most about your job?
I love the fact that every day is completely different. I love creative work and being creative. I love seeing a spark happen in someone's eyes, where I see that they come alive, because that's what I felt that as a young person, basically I went through a machine of education and came out with nothing, or very little apart from Mrs. Springle. So I'm interested in really kind of the days when it feels really special to me as when I see the light go on in someone's face, which is interesting that this is called Lights Up.
On the other side of
Yes.
that, what do you find more negative about your role?
I think that working as an artist in this country is incredibly difficult. It's very painstaking in terms of raising funding. I think you have to be very resilient to accept rejection. Going up for auditions over and over and over again and not getting jobs. You have to be able to ride the waves. Equally, as a director, you have to ride the waves of criticism. Not everyone is going to like your work.
Yeah, that must be very challenging.
And, also, as a director in a room, you've got actors for whom some may be incredibly vulnerable, some may not agree, and you've got a real diverse group of people that you have to take care of, and you have to support them to take these artistic and creative risks. And that takes a lot of courage as well from the director to really see what's going on for someone. And to understand how to support them to make, for that light to go on to make that performance.
I'd also like to talk to you about the changes in the industry for women.
Yes.
Have you noticed anything throughout your career?
Unfortunately, no.
Oh.
Well, I don't think there's enough change, and I think particularly, I'm getting on my little hobby horse now, I think particularly for older women, I think there are less exciting and interesting roles for older women, particularly in film and television. I think when you get to a certain age and you're regarded as non-sexual, you're not interesting. And if you're not interesting, you don't carry a story. And if you think of, kind of the franchise of 007, they can just carry on and on and on, and it doesn't seem to make any difference. So I think making and creating roles for strong older women is really important for all of us. I'm 61 this year, and I think that, we need to see exciting roles for women in their 60s and 70s who, anyway, that's what I feel, and I also think that nothing much has changed. I think still, we still haven't had a woman artistic director of the National Theatre or the Royal Shakespeare Company. The opportunities for women are still limited, and I think again in terms of representation from Black and Asian women directors, only one woman has ever won an Oscar for being a director, and that is appalling. Utterly appalling.
I definitely agree with you on that. But what would you say the main advantages are for being a woman in your role?
I think that because we are normally juggling lots of different things in our lives, I think we are incredibly empathetic and understanding and we can empower people. And hopefully we can be role models for the next generation.
Yeah. Could you also tell me a bit more about the specific disadvantages maybe that you've encountered in your role as a woman?
I think the disadvantages are that, well, where I came from in Hounslow, there are no theatres. So not having those role models, not having those connections in the industry, I think, were a barrier. I hadn't ever really been able to lose my accent. You know, I can't speak terribly poshly. I just can't, and I'm not bloody interested, to be honest. You know, so I think that the whole thing about class, and I think yes, being a woman is a disadvantage in as much as there are less men that want to do it, and there are more parts, and there are more women that want to do it, and there are less parts. So statistically, you know, there's a huge imbalance.
Yeah. Well, if you had a magic wand and you could change only one thing about the industry, what would that be?
I'd be changing the representation of women, all women. I think the over-sexualisation and representation of women needs to be challenged. You know, I would like women to be seen as passionate and intelligent, and you know, that can make a difference in the world, rather than being seen as a sexual object. I think if we get that one thing done, then things might start to level out.
Would you say that your passion about changing the representation of women like kind of sparks your wanting like social change in your theatre? Would you say that reflects quite strongly?
Yes, yes. I don't know, there's so many things that I feel strongly about. I mean, for instance, you know, in acting alone, and I'm No Hero, which were two solo shows that I did a few years ago, they were about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And you know, I think the challenge that we have as artists in terms of how we respond to climate change and the environmental challenges, I think it's just much more diverse. You know, I've worked with young people and people who have been offenders, and you know, for those young people, being seen as something other than that label is just, again, it's so important. And taking that work to young people in schools and thinking about the consequences of criminal activity and taking risks. You know, I've worked on so many different projects, and every single one of them I don't feel that we've got to that point where we can go, all right, we've ticked that box now.
Yeah. Well, obviously this might be a difficult question because you've done so much stuff in this industry, but would you be able to pinpoint your greatest achievement?
I think what is an achievement is that I have continued to work as an artist for as long as I have. That actually in itself is an achievement, to keep going and to have that resilience to be able to ride the waves of life. That is an achievement, and I hope that some of the people that I've worked with, it has made a difference to them.
Yeah, absolutely. So could you explain to me more about why your role's been so diverse?
Yes, because essentially it's very difficult to get work in one field all the time. So what has happened is that I have kind of diversified. So if it was acting, it might be a voiceover, it might be a commercial, it might be a TV, film, theatre. If I'm a director, it might be with young people, it might be in a school, it might be on tour, it might be in a building. And I've also worked in using my skills as an actor in role play and in facilitating workshops and things like that with senior managers in companies, corporate companies. And so you're still using your theatre and your drama skills to enable people to learn. As I say, that might be again, in a prison setting, or it might be with a 3-year-old at a nursery, or it might be in a residential home with someone with dementia. I do feel really privileged that the area that I work in has so many applications, and that I can be so diverse, and that's what I love. I think at school I really struggled with attention. I didn't know I was dyslexic when I was at school, but I was, and I think that whole thing about being able to concentrate on something, I get bored. So it's just fantastic for me that I get to do lots of different things, and I love learning. I hated learning when I was at school because it didn't mean anything, but now I know why I'm learning. Suddenly, I went to the library last week and they said, "Oh, we've got some books for you." And I went, "Oh, how exciting, books!" And I just thought, oh my God, I can't ever imagine ever saying that if I thought back to being a child, books. But yeah, so I think when you find your passion and that's fueling it, I can't seem to find a way of stopping, because it just seems to keep expanding and expanding. And I love learning new disciplines. I love, just being able to do so many different things. And as I say, from a way of sustaining yourself as an artist, I think we have to have a portfolio of skills, and that is what sustains a career.
Yeah, it is extremely useful as well. What would you say your dream role is in the industry?
I think I'm doing it. Yeah, I think I love what I'm doing. And I also love working with young people who also want to be in this profession. So that sense of contributing to the next generation of practitioners is really, really exciting. And in the last 5-10 years, I've had the opportunity to travel internationally as well. And what I realise is that, whether it's someone in New Zealand or Australia or in America and across Europe, I'm working on this big project across Europe at the moment with 10 different countries. It's just so exciting that it feels like this family of people extends over the whole world, and we're all using the same skills. I'm in Delhi, and I'm watching practitioners use Augusto Boal's forum theatre with young people to challenge mental health issues and bullying. Being in Palestine, in the West Bank, and seeing Palestinian actors and directors using theatre with young people who are in refugee camps. Using my skills to work with young people in the jungle in Calais before that refugee camp was dismantled. The application of this work internationally is just, for me, that's where it all starts to join up, but it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And to be working with different practitioners and directors and academics as well. And we're all speaking the same language. The language of theatre and drama to make a difference. Yeah,
well, clearly you're very, very passionate about what you do, but how would you suggest a young person gets into the industry as well?
Well, it depends what area they want to be in. So, for instance, I think if they want to get into acting, then I think having those opportunities to be not only participating in school, but also looking for those opportunities to work in youth theatre, to work in amateur dramatics, to look at those opportunities to go to drama school. I know it's really expensive. It was relatively as expensive for me when I went to drama school. But I think if you know why you're doing something, nothing will get in your way. Nothing will get in your way. So for my dad to say, I'm not going to lend you the money. You know, you can waste your own money, Ava, but you're not wasting mine. And actually that made me stronger, because I thought, don't you tell me. Don't you dare tell me what I can do with my life. And I won't tell, and so I think that passion, you know, and that vision that you have, that's what's going to, you know, help you to overcome whatever challenges there are in your life.
Yeah.
But having those, taking up any opportunity that you have to get experience, to meet people, to talk to people, that's what guides you, and that's what will make a difference. And I think when you're committed to it and you're working really hard at it, it will, that tree will bear fruit. It will, because that determination will see you through.
Yeah, well, obviously your journey in theatre has been so interesting to listen to. But what advice would you give to your younger self?
Believe in yourself, I think. Love yourself. Take care of yourself. And your friends are the most important people.
And finally, is there anything else you'd like to talk about that I haven't asked you?
Well, I will say just one other thing, which is that particularly in the last 10 years, if I look back 10 years ago, I didn't know that I would be doing what I'm doing then. And I think that there has been a kind of an organic kind of development of my work. So I've become interested in this, and then that leads on to something else. And that's why I'm doing the show that I was doing yesterday with those young people. That all came from an idea that I had 10 years ago. So I just think that there is something about keep asking questions and keep being kind of sort of open to possibility, and things come to you. Because sometimes I get to the end of the project, I'm so tired. I'm just like a zombie. I just think, I don't know what. But that opportunity to then step back, something kind of comes to you, and then you find the idea, the next creative kernel for something to drive you forward to the next project.
Yeah.
But kind of just keep listening, keep taking care of yourself, and
Well, it's been an amazing opportunity to talk to you, and thank you very much for answering all my questions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.